We are live.
Awesome.
Welcome.
So,
I'm Lisa. This is Anise. Welcome to the Library Lived In. I'm going to turn it over to you, Anise. You go ahead.
thank you very much. So, for anybody who is joining us, we are happy that you are watching. So, this month's pick is a children's book. It's called Half Magic by Edgar. It was published in 1904, and I think, well, I'll talk about it more in the summary. But I read the book. I had read it before years ago, but I reread it, and then I read about half of it to my kids so far, and we all loved it very much. So I definitely give it 5 stars. What did you rate it, Lisa?
I was going to say 4. I'll go 4.5. I feel like I have to save like the 5 stars for, the perfect book.
Yeah.
That I'm going to read over and over and over and over and over. So I'll read this one again, and it's wonderful, and it's I hadn't read it before. It's way better than I expected it to be, even. He's really funny. Author is really funny. So yeah, I'll go with 4.5.
Yes, and so what I didn't know about the author that I learned when I looked him up was that he was a lyricist, and he was a playwright, and so he was used to writing like these really dynamic things, and so I think that translated really well to the children's book, which I wouldn't have necessarily expected.
Yeah, I didn't think about that so much, but I didn't read up on his bio until after I'd read the book, but the dialogue goes really well throughout the book, and I'm sure that plays in.
It does, and the interesting thing is that the other things that he's written haven't really been preserved or remembered the way that his children's books have. So I thought that was interesting, because he originally wrote, this story was the first children's book that he wrote, and he wrote it because he had been reading E. Nesbit's books to his son, and they both enjoyed them so much that he looked for other books like that and couldn't find any, so he decided to write his own, which was apparently a great idea since they've lasted this long.
Right.
So anyway, the summary of the book is that there's a group of siblings who start out their summer. Oh, and we should mention our mugs. We didn't mention them last time. We had book club mugs made.
There you go.
These when we have our book club. So that's super fun. So a group of siblings starts out the summer with nothing to do, and they have been reading. Actually, in the book, they read some of E. Nesbit's books, and after reading those, they wish that something magical would happen to them. And then they happen to find an ancient talisman that grants wishes, but it only grants half of your wish. And so the book is all of their adventures and everything that happens when they use this coin. So I guess we can start off with characters. So we have the 4 siblings. Jane is the eldest sister, and it never specifically says what her age is, but I'm guessing it's 12 or maybe 13.
I think that Mark is 10 somewhere.
Mark is 11.
Mark. Okay, there you go.
Yeah, Mark is 11 because it mentions that at one point with the roller skates that they looked around for an 11-year-old boy and didn't see one. So Catherine is 9, which it also specifically says. And then Martha, it doesn't say her age, but I'm guessing she's probably 6 or 7. And then really the only other main characters there are is the children's mother, Allison, who works for a newspaper, and Mr. Smith, the bookshop owner. And so I really liked the characters in the book. They're all really, really full of personality. And I love how curious the children are and how they're clever, but not always as clever as they think they are. And I also really enjoyed Mr. Smith because you don't even find out his name until halfway through the book. Before that, he's just described as the small gentleman, and he has a little pointy beard. I really liked his character because he listened to the children and to their opinions and what they were thinking. And he valued their input when they get thrown into an adventure together. And he mentions that he believes in magic and he believes the things that they're telling him. And he actually makes a lot of literature references, which I also enjoyed.
Literature references are always appreciated.
They are.
I loved, you know, we were talking about the way that Edgar writes. I love the way that each of the kids is, like their personality just shows up. It's not really explained to you. But he does a great example of like having an interaction between a couple of them and then saying, and this will show you exactly how this person is. And it's so funny because if you know children at all, you know, and if you ever had a sibling, you're like you just have a gut feeling then of how that character is. But he doesn't have to describe them to you at all. It's just one short couple sentences of an interaction and you just know.
Yes, I noticed that also, and I thought it was very clever. What I enjoyed most, I think, was when after Jane's adventure, when she comes back home to her family, and she's playing dolls with Martha, she's trying so hard to play nicely, but then her true nature reasserts itself, and dolls are being stabbed and burned at the stake and all kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, and like you were saying, trying to guesstimate Martha's age, and there's a point in the book where it says, like, you never really know if Martha's going to be like one of the big kids or she's going to be one of the babies. And at this point in the book, she's a baby. Like, and you can just picture that like youngest child who like is always trying to keep up with the older ones and trying to act so much more mature, but sometimes you just can't, you know, you can't take it anymore. And so just, yeah, he catches those personality things like so well.
I agree. And something else that I enjoyed about the children was that it's made very clear from the start that they are readers and they love to read. And they spend their summer going to the library, and they're so upset that in the summer you can only check out 4 fiction books. And so they still check out their limit of their 10 books that they can check out. But that feels like something that would annoy me also.
Absolutely, right? But I love too that like it's just okay that they don't all love the same type of books. I love that, you know, is it Jane that loves poetry or Catherine that loves poetry? I forget which one likes which ones, but it's, you know, like they have their 4 books and then 6 books of poetry, or how Martha got to check out picture books because she was still that age and that wasn't quite as good as fiction, but almost as good.
Yeah.
Or even the annoying thing for Mark, which I thought would really annoy me, is when he tries to pick out books that sound like fiction that aren't really fiction because they have those kind of titles that try to make it, you know, sound more interesting than it really is. So that was really funny to me. That was just awesome because you can just see exploring the library, you know, and finding all those pictures.
Yeah, and so I really appreciated that, and I think this happens a lot in books, it seems like, because people who write books love books. And so a lot of times the characters will love books also, and that immediately, like whoever's reading that book, I just feel connected to the character already because they like books and I like books.
Well, and that's That's what happened with Lyriel when we were talking before. Like, hey, she lives in a library. How can you go wrong?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that also, I'm not sure if I noticed all the literary references, but I wrote down the ones that I did notice. So first and foremost was E. Nesbit, and that was Eager's intention was for his books to lead people to her books because he thought they were so amazing and that she was just the master of these kind of books. So the other references I noticed were several to Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland. Mr. Smith at one point, when he's speaking to the girl's mother, she's like, "Who is this? He talks like the White Queen from Alice in Wonderland." And then when the children are in medieval times, they're going through the wood, and Catherine says, "It looks like a told you would." And Martha starts to get really scared because she thinks that the Jabberwocky is going to come.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's not said right out, but that reference, it goes straight back to Alice in Wonderland again. And then specifically mentioned was Mark Twain, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, which they did not want to read after their adventure. And I think when they are there in medieval times, it mentions that it was exactly like it describes in T.H. White's The Once and Future King, which I've actually read the first part of that book, but it was a long, long time ago, but it's on my list.
Mine too.
And then the last one that I saw was the children's mother is going to read to them before bed. And so I think that's when she was going to read Mark Twain to them, but then they wanted to read a normal story, like Five Little Peppers and How They Grew, which is also on my list.
I've never heard of that one before. I was like, I think I need to look this up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's also where they want to go when they're talking about their wishes. Where is it that Catherine wants to go? And they all say, no, 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 I don't want to go there. And don't be asking, don't be wishing for that either, you know.
Yeah, because and that was something I liked too, is that I think this happens a lot more when you're a child, but it happens to me still now, is that children don't have a lot of like real world experience with things, and so you use things that you've read to make your decisions, and I still do that. But I think especially for children, that's what you do, is if you've read something similar, you try it out and hope it works. But I think that's what, when they're thinking about what wishes to make, Catherine at first says she was going to wish for like $1 million or all the money in the world or something like that. And they're like, no, that never works out. Don't do it. And so I really liked that they use things that they've learned or seen in books in their decision-making process.
They're very logical children. And the fact that it's set in the 20s puts it before TV. And so, I mean, that really is, they would either have the experiences that they have with other children or what they read. That's what they're going to have.
Yeah.
Especially in the household that they grow up in. They don't have one parent hanging out with them all the time, you know. They don't have somebody to make up stories for them.
Yeah, exactly. And I really liked, so let's move more into plot and storyline. So what I enjoyed about that was that it started out with just ordinary children wishing for something out of the ordinary to happen, because I think everybody has done that at some point. And so I guess when they're figuring out how the charm works, because at first they inadvertently make wishes and they don't know that it's connected to the charm. And so strange things start happening. Martha wishes that their cat could talk. And since it only grants half a wish, the cat starts babbling gibberish, and it is hilarious.
And the cat's not happy about it.
No, she would rather not speak. And so I really appreciated that they figured out the arithmetic, and I think it kind of helped them to see that there is a real world value to math, because as a child, I did not believe there was. As an adult, I can appreciate it very much because I use it all the time in cooking or gardening, and it allows me to order my surroundings in the way that I want them. So I appreciate it very much now. But as a child, I think I might have appreciated it a little bit more if I had read this book and seen how careful they had to be about figuring out exactly how much of something to wish for. And so I liked that aspect of it.
And it took them a little practice to kind of get it right. It wasn't like, oh, halfway and we figured it out. Like, it took them a little working it out. So, and who was it that says, I wish that fractions weren't a thing, or there were no more fractions?
Yeah, that was Martha. She was like,
yeah.
They explained it to her, and she was like, well, what would half of never having to learn fractions be?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure we all had that wish at some point, you know. Never had that. So it was adorable.
It was. And so I made a note too about I saw this in somebody else's review, but I thought it was really good, so I'm going to share it anyway. That the overall atmosphere of the story is a warm family environment with limited parental involvement and a touch of magic that does not really go the way the characters think it will go, which is apparently very similar to E. Nesbit's style. So I think that's kind of ideal, and exactly what you would want in a childhood is to know that you're part of a family and to be close to them, but to be able to explore and make your mistakes and kind of do your own thing. Knowing that the adult help is there if you need it, because at one point the children need help from Mr. Smith. And their mother thinks that she's going crazy because all of these strange things are happening.
Yeah, she's very concerned for her mental well-being, which in the 50s or even in the 20s is much bigger of a concern than it is. I don't want to belittle it, but today, like, we have a lot more help today and understanding today than they did back then. So, and I think, you know, the bias too of women having mental health issues at that time was even bigger. So.
Exactly, and I don't think we mentioned, but the children's father died some time ago before the story, and it's never said outright, but I suspect, given the time frame, he probably was killed in World War I. And so in the 20s, there would have been a lot of families just like theirs with a working mother, and they had to have a nanny come in who they did not like. But I thought that was interesting. Do you have any other thoughts about that?
That's one of the things that I came across was sort of a discussion. I was looking at literature in the 50s and one of the things that talks about is the setting of the 1920s and some of the social things that the book addresses that I didn't necessarily pick up on altogether. So I'm just going to read this little quote, and I'll post it online. But it says, "Half Magic was written in the 1950s and set in the 1920s. Not surprisingly, some of the gender references can seem a little dated." And then it goes on, and it says, "We tend to forget present something we tend to forget really did happen in the 1920s, a positive image of a single working mother dedicated to both her career and her 4 children." And so it talks about, like, everybody has to work together as a family. Everybody has to do chores. Like, you don't get to go off and play and have adventures right away. Things like that. It talks about how the mom didn't get to go, like, often be a bareback rider, like live her dream. She had to go to work and be the grown up and take care of her family. And anyway, so it goes on to remind us that women didn't just come into the workplace after like 1970s and women's liberation and everything, like you said, World War I and just different events like this was going on. So there's a little bit of social commentary there. And I guess a little less deep. One of my favorite things, so one of my examples that I wrote down of just how Edgar can give like a quick description of somebody and you kind of have them pegged, was when he described their nanny / housekeeper, who was Miss Bick. It said, a woman named Miss Bick came in every day to care for the children, but she couldn't seem to care for them very much, nor they for her. And I just love that because you really don't need to know what she looks like. You didn't need a whole lot of big description. Like, couldn't bother to care for them. And so they really couldn't be bothered with her. And I think that said a lot about, their situation and those relationships, they really depended on each other instead of the adults so much.
Yeah, and I appreciated very much. So in this story, they each have a turn. Well, once they figure out what the charm does, they each have a turn making wishes. And so Martha accidentally wishes the cat could talk. And then that's the point where Jane has already realized what the talisman does, because their mother had taken it as bus fare, but she didn't spend it, but then she made a wish that she was home and she ended up halfway home. And so that's when Jane realized. And so then Mark accidentally has the coin inside his roller skate and makes a wish that they were all on a desert island, and they end up somewhere in the Sahara and almost kidnapped by an Arab. And so after that is when they start to be more orderly about their wishes. And so I think like the really big, elaborate wish that they make is Catherine's wish. And they wish to go back to twice as far as the time of King Arthur and watch 2 tournaments and do 2 good deeds. And there might have been something else, I can't remember. But anyway, so then they go back to medieval times and they rescue Sir Lancelot, and they see a tournament, and Catherine lets her frustration with Lancelot for not being grateful for being saved get to her, and she fights him in the tournament, and it all goes wrong. And at that point, the children are like the knights are trying to escort everybody away after the disastrous tournament. And the children say that their sister has done something terrible, but they don't care, and they'll still stand by her because she's their sister. And I really liked that.
I do. Like, there's definitely plenty of sibling rivalry going on in the book, and definitely, plenty of personality conflict or what. It's a very believable family, very realistic, but they do stand by each other and they do help each other out. And they have like their own little social order of things. Like, I love when they start off the summer and they make their library trips, and they realize that coming back from the library, they can read the books that they're carrying. It's way more fun than like returning the old library books. Yeah. And it's just heavy, old weight. And so they talk about stopping on different stoops of houses and reading. But then when they talk about, well, when somebody starts reading out loud, and it's Catherine that loves poetry, starts reading the poetry out loud, and then Martha just sat down in the middle of the sidewalk and was like, I'm not walking anymore. I'm not listening to this. You have to stop. And that's when they made the rule that nobody could read aloud on the way home. You could read to yourself, but you couldn't read aloud. And I love that. Like, we all have to make life compromises. you know, but they have their own order of like, I'll stick by you and I'll be there for you, but you have to keep in line.
Yeah, exactly. I really love that too. And so the other wishes they make, Martha, what was Martha's wish? I should have gone back and looked because I couldn't remember exactly what it was because she doesn't do it right and it goes wrong.
I forget. Was it? I don't remember.
No, I would have my book, but the girls carried it off because they wanted me to keep reading it.
Oh, yes. Ben started reading it and he said it was okay, but he didn't love it. I told him we needed to read it again because he was missing all the good things.
So I know with her wish, they were at the movies. Back then they had silent pictures, so it was not exciting or interesting to a little 6 or 7-year-old girl. And it seems like she was always relegated to lay down under the movie chairs and take a nap. But she gets fed up with that and decides to make a wish instead.
Like she wishes she wasn't there. That's what it is. She wishes, I wish I weren't there. So then she is half there.
And everyone thinks she's a ghost.
Yes, becomes a sort of out of body experience for her and them trying to figure out how do you get her back in her body? How do you get her back to herself? That's when they end up needing Mr. Smith's help. Like, how do I fix this one? What's twice of half of somebody being in their body?
Yeah. And so I think that's the point where you learn Mr. Smith's name. And so up till that point, he's just been showing up at odd moments, crossing paths with the children's mother especially. And he believes their story when they tell him, and when he sees Martha, they wander into his bookshop. And I said it before, but I really liked how excited he was that he was seeing real magic too. It wasn't just the children who were excited. He was excited about it too.
Well, he's a bookshop owner.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there's something to the fact that the mom, and she's the one that has to deal with the real matters of life. Her husband died, so she's the one that has to take care of the family, both like as nurturer and provider. And she's the one that has to go, you know, like she's had to go to work and she's had to put away her dreams and she has to whatever so that she can take care of them and deal with the realities of life. And Mr. Smith is not dealing with life, you know, but he believes in the children. Even when he picks up the mom the first time when she wishes herself halfway home on accident, mm-hmm. She says, well, I must have passed out or something and started walking home, and I don't know, you know, that must be the only explanation. And he goes, oh, well, there's never one explanation. Mm-hmm. You know, like he just believes in possibilities. And you can see that like balance from the outset to their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so then the children, well, so then the next wish was Jane. She was starting to get upset because she could tell that Mr. Smith and her mother liked each other. And she was the only one who could really remember their father. And so she starts to worry about what's going to happen with their family. And so then she makes a hasty wish that she wasn't in their family anymore, or that she was in a different family, something like that. And she ends up in the most horrible family, and she's still kind of herself deep down inside, but very conflicted. And her siblings go and rescue her, and Mr. Smith helps with that also. And then at that point, they go to their mother's office. And that's when I felt really sad for her, because she's just struggling with thinking that she's going crazy. And the kids realize that they can help her, but she won't believe them. And so they wish her that she was a bareback rider, and so she has like this crazy moment where she's a bareback rider, and then it all kind of falls into place, and Jane feels much more warmly towards Mr. Smith now that he helped her when she had wished herself into a different family. And it all just kind of falls into place. They make the wish that everything will work out, and there's like this glow and like chiming bells and magical scents, and they figure that that's probably the last wish in the coin. When they were in King Arthur's time, they had a chat with Merlin, and he let them know it was not a limitless coin and that they only had a certain number of wishes that they could make. So I thought that was a very happy resolution, and I especially liked at the very end, they pass the coin on to some other children, and they don't explain it to them. They just let them figure out how it works on their own.
Yes. Is it Mark who said, well, we didn't get any instructions? I don't think that's part of the deal. Like, you just have to give it to somebody else and let them figure it out.
Yeah.
And they like sneak and watch and wait for the other person to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the bit in there where like it actually takes a few minutes kind of over Jane's reflection over her father and like making peace. Like she didn't think there was any magic left in the coin, but she kind of wished that she knew that her father would be okay with them having a stepfather and being happy and kind of moving on. And she just kind of knows like that it's all right. Yeah. That she's able to kind of have that peace.
And then with everything else that's happened in the book, then you really feel like her father is half there, like comforting her and letting her know that it's okay. Yeah. Even though it doesn't say it outright, but you just know that that's what happened. Yes,
that it's legitimate in terms of the world. Absolutely. It's just very sweet the way it all comes. Like, it's so funny the whole time. You're just laughing, but then they really deal with some serious things like on their way.
Yeah. So the setting of this book, we already mentioned, was written in the 50s, but it was set 30 years prior in the 1920s. And it's set in Toledo, Ohio, which is where Edward Edgar was from. And so some interesting things about the setting is that the children travel around by streetcar. There are a few buses, but it's still mostly streetcars at this point. Which I did some reading about that in that time period, and it was very interesting. So the flat terrain and relatively dense population of Ohio and the surrounding states at that time made it kind of like the hub of streetcars at that time. So at one point, there were more than 700 miles of track in Toledo. And for a short time, interurban railways were the 5th largest industry in the United States, which I guess I hadn't realized that it was that big. I just kind of assumed it was just like in city centers, you know, really for taking people from the country into the city. And so this time period of the 20s was really like the height of streetcar travel. And it didn't take long after this time period for buses to replace the streetcars completely. So by 1939, there were already routes being discontinued, and the very last streetcar's final run in Toledo was December 31st, 1949. So by the time this book was written, streetcars were already like a thing of the past. And so I thought that was interesting, because then even when this book was published, that mode of transportation would have seemed kind of like romantic and old-fashioned, because the kids reading this book wouldn't remember traveling that way or had never traveled that way. And so I thought that was super interesting, and it sounded really fun to me.
That's awesome. I never would have realized that was.
Yeah, but it was a big part of life at that time. And I also thought it was interesting thinking about the children. Their mother gives them fare and they travel in the streetcars by themselves to go around town.
Yes. Well, and it talks about Miss Vick, who couldn't be bothered, wouldn't take them to the lake or to the country for the day. She wouldn't take them on field trips. And so they're like, the only thing they could do was go to the library or go walk around and whatever, to shops,
Right.
the bookstore, whatever. Like, there wasn't anything else to do. I thought it was really funny that, you know, it talked about how many miles it was. I don't remember. It was like 2 miles. They would walk to
I think so.
with their 10 books in hand, and then home with their 10 books in hand. But it talks about how they would stop on all the stoops of the houses on the way home reading their books. And I thought, like, you wouldn't do that now. Then you're not stopping on their porch to like sit around.
I wonder about sidewalks. I don't really know anything about how prevalent sidewalks were. On one hand, it seems like they might be more prevalent because more people were walking. But I really don't know.
Well, and plus, like, being in town versus in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in town.
So they lived in, and does it say if they lived in the suburbs or in the town? Because I know their aunt and uncle live in the suburbs, because that's what causes a problem when their mother wishes herself home and she ends up on some back country road, like half a mile outside of town. I think from what it sounded like they lived in town, because it's talking about all the streets around.
Lives in, like, the family lives in town, and that her in-laws live in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
That was so I think that's why they can go to the library and whatnot.
Right. And so I was curious and I looked it up. And so when she wishes herself home, she ends up halfway out on Bancroft Street, which is a real street. And I looked at it in Google Earth and read some about the history of it, because the neighborhood surrounding that is known as the Old Orchard neighborhood. And the 1920s is when it really started to be settled. And so before that point, and I assume the point that's in the story, it's just countryside and orchards. And that's why she's so confused when she's sitting in their living room and then all of a sudden she's out in the middle of the country on the side of the road. So I thought that was cool that it was real. And I assume that Edward Eager was familiar with that area.
It's so fun. I love when you find things like that and it's something the author is really familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's something fun to completely made up, complete fantasy, but there's also something fun to those little nods to your actual history or what. Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
Another fact that I came across is somebody who is from the Old Orchard neighborhood who was there in the 1920s was Millie Benson, aka Carolyn Keene, is from the Old Orchard. Yeah. And so she's the one. So Nancy Drew was written by a bunch of ghostwriters, but she was the first one who did the first 23 books, which are probably the best ones. And so she was from that area. And so at that time period, she was living there.
Well, there you go. What do you know? And I haven't read the Nancy Drews. I've read a few of the Bobbsey twins, but somehow I missed that. Have you read them all?
I've read a lot of them, but it was a long, long time ago when I was probably like 12. So, but we'll have to do those sometime.
Yeah, Nancy Drew.
Or maybe you read Nancy Drew and I read Hardy Boys or something like that.
There you go. I've read a lot of Hardy Boys.
Oh yeah. I haven't read as many of those as I have Nancy Drew. But.
No. Well, it's very cool. And then tell about you're gonna tell about the popcorn, the not popcorn,
parched corn. So
There you go.
at one point in the book, I think before the children go to the movie theater, they have some spending money that they've saved up and they want to get some treats. And so they get some parched corn, which I looked up because I didn't know what it was. And so it's kind of like half popped corn. And so you don't use popcorn kernels, you just use, I'm not sure, regular corn, I don't know, but it's dried. And you just kind of like toast it in a skillet and it kind of puffs up, but it doesn't pop. And so from what I read, the most similar thing that we have now is corn nuts. And so that's what the children get as a snack. And I really wanted to try some, but then I read you couldn't use popcorn because it just pops. So
can we not make it now?
well, I don't know. I might have to grow my own corn first.
So it'll just be a few days.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you'll like have it down before I will.
Yeah, and so another of the connection in the Little House books, on the banks of Plum Creek, Laura mentions parched corn that they eat at Thanksgiving. Ma puts 3 kernels of parched corn next to their plates so they can remember, because I guess supposedly the story is that that's what the Pilgrims had to eat on the first Thanksgiving was just parched corn, which I don't know if that's true or not. So it is a very traditional American food, and the Indians also ate corn that way.
But at some point we decided corn nuts and popcorn were the way to go.
I guess so.
Which I'm not even, I was thinking about, like, I ate corn nuts like nobody's business as a kid and a teenager. And I have no idea how those were even made, and that's probably not good.
Yeah, so it said, because when I looked at it, I was like, oh, they're just corn nuts. But so how they make corn nuts is they take corn, I guess dried corn, and they soak it for 3 days to make it get big again, and then they deep fry it. And so that's what corn nuts are.
Perfectly healthy.
Yeah, I actually didn't think that they were real corn, like actual corn kernels, but they are.
I figured there was some somewhere in there, but
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Next time we get together, we'll try and make some parched corn.
That sounds good. So I also pulled up a few things about publishing in the 20s. Since their mother worked for a newspaper, I thought it was funny that the point was made that she worked for the other newspaper, the one that hardly anybody on the street subscribed to, which is just so different from now. You have tons of sources for your news, and it doesn't have to be local to you. But back then, there were only a couple of sources of news, and so there probably was one that was always more popular than the other.
Yeah, like each town, this is your paper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So did you go look up and find out which one was popular there at that time? And
No, I didn't, but I did find out that in the 20s, Reader's Digest, Time, Vanity Fair, and Vogue were all founded. So it was a good time for
really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Downton Abbey says so too.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I did not look up about, and I don't think it ever mentions a name of what the newspaper was that she worked for.
No, and it really, I'm glad you brought that up, because I know when I read it, I kind of stopped for a minute, like, what did that mean? Like, nobody on the block wanted that paper, but it makes more sense now. Think of it in terms of, like, that's the paper that everybody has versus, I was thinking, what was that, like, a less, I don't know, was it like the Inquirer versus the Times? Like, what were they getting at? But that's one that makes more sense this way.
That's funny.
So, and the whole thing with her boss and everything.
Because she ends up getting a promotion because she didn't have the job she wanted, but she got it in the end because the children wished it for her.
Yeah. Yes, because they finally figured out how to use Mr. Smith helped them figure out how to use the coin right.
Yeah.
Well, I had an interesting little bit about, I was looking up that, like, I don't know, the 50s era literature. When I read the book, I thought of all the books that I've read, it reminded me most of E.L. Konigsberg.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite books is From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankenweiler.
Uh-huh.
Have you read that one?
Oh yeah, I love it. I have it.
Yeah. I think I've worn out a copy and then had to get a new one. And I think the first time I was introduced to it was in elementary school, and one of my teachers gave it to us like as a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And so lost count, but I love that. But I felt like a lot of things were similar in that, you know, they had their home and their family, but they went on an adventure and things worked out. They came home, they figured it out. This is sort of the framework of it. But I also was thinking, like fantasy novels now for children are like this big, not, you know, like page count is so much different than it used to be. I feel like the worlds are so much more involved now. You know, if you think of like Harry Potter and like the worlds that we have become way more developed. I think some of the older literature, I was thinking it's much more simple. It's the little bits of magic. Like in this one, they just wish that something magical would happen to them. Something little, and the coin comes to them. It's not that they're completely in a different world the whole time. And so I went off looking around, and I kept seeing that this time period that the Edgar novels came out in were referred to as the Second Golden Age.
Oh.
And then I had to know what the first golden age was, which was apparently Victorian era literature. And that was the first time that children's literature was really a thing. I came across, I'll post this article too. I came across an article by Amanda Craig. It's this amazing thing all about children's literature. She talks about the first golden age is like when Peter Pan was written. It's the first time that a child goes into a completely fantastical world and deals with all these adventures in that sort of way. And that there was this big boom of that in Victorian times. And then you kind of like, it petered off. And then the second round of that was when Edgar was publishing. And so the difference that it offers up is that in the first golden age, there's like a moral purpose, a moral sense to most of the writing, that everything turns out all right. Like at the end of every story, whatever you go through, it all turns out all right in the end, it works out. And like the problems are simpler than they are now. Whatever it is they're facing is like, is smaller problems that they have to figure out. Where in the second golden age was 1950s through the 1970s. It was post World War II. And the quote here that kind of made me stop and think was, to grow into an adulthood aware that someone somewhere can destroy the world with a nuclear bomb does tend to have a profound effect on the imagination. It's saying that the literature that comes out of post-World War II, it's much bigger. You're dealing with good and evil and these bigger forces. You're not just dealing with like the sort of day-to-day smaller problems. And so that fantasy became a huge thing in post-World War II. And then you have Tolkien and you have C.S. Lewis and a lot more fantasy. And so I kind of felt like Half Magic fit kind of in between those two. You know, there's the little more fantasy, and he was leaning towards E. Nesbitt, who was of the earlier generation, and you could see that effect on his book. But you can see some of, I don't know, you can see a little bit of both. He kind of falls in the middle. And then the second golden age, it talks a lot about spiritual aspect in a lot of literature. Like you have Aslan, you have somebody that plays that role. So those are the two golden ages. And what the author of the article suggests is that we're in a third golden age now, that what we have right now is going to be considered the third golden age. And he says in the first and second golden ages, there were like 5 or 6 big name authors that were publishing, and you can find other authors, but really like the big publishing, there were only a handful. And then now, because of the resources we have, the internet, the technology, ebooks, everything, you have 100 or more that have big publishing. And the thing it'll be the test of time, like which ones will stick with us really over time. But now the suggestion is that now it's not just good and evil, but we have to deal with death as well, like the Dark Materials book is brought up, which you have read those ones. I haven't read those ones yet, but
yeah. Yes, so I think we could probably just do a whole episode just talking about these kinds of things. But I would agree that it's the third golden age, and J.K. Rowling certainly kicked it off. Like, there's no contending that point. And in so Tamora Pierce is an author that I've read a lot of. Actually, I think I've read all her books. She has many, many books, and they're all like really strong female characters in like a fantasy setting, and like kind of a medieval fantasy type setting. And so before Harry Potter, all of her books came out in quartets. There would be 4 slim volumes, and that's just what she wrote. And then after Harry Potter, her books started coming out in sequels. So there would be a first book that was thicker and a second book that was thicker. And she said in the first ones that came out that way, in her little author's notes at the back, she thanked J.K. Rowling profusely for showing the publishing companies that people do want to read big books. They will read big books. And I know that was a problem for Lord of the Rings also, and that's why it was divided into 3 books, because they thought nobody would read a book that was that long. And so Harry Potter has had a huge, huge impact on all publishing, not even just children's books, but young adult books, and even adult books also, and not only in the size, but Harry Potter is just so complex, and everything fits together so perfectly, and there's so many layers, and I think that just kind of showed everybody that I guess that the public can handle it. And so I don't think there's going to be anything else like Harry Potter. I don't think there hasn't been anything like Harry Potter before, and there's not going to be anything else like it. And so anyway, that's what I think.
No, I think you're right. And I think it's absolutely a turning point, like another launching point for, that next golden age is that and I think not only you were saying that the public can handle it, that J.K. Rowling is saying the public can handle it, but I think that we're looking for it too. If you go back to the first or the second golden age, and I'm saying that the themes are less complex, and the problems that the problems that are in the books are just so much simpler. And here we have layers upon layers upon layers, and what you think you're dealing with isn't what you're really dealing with. And I think that's reflective of the times and our lives. Our lives are so much more complex, and we're looking for more depth in our fantasy too.
Right, and I think part of that comes from we have so many conveniences and things that save us time that we don't have to put like most of our time into like the little details of daily living. So I think we have a lot more free time, I guess. And so I think that's part of it. Is back then you had to spend a lot of time doing just everyday things, like laundry took probably like days to do. I mean, not that it can't take days now, because it takes me days sometimes.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean. And so something that I've noticed too about those older children's books is that the language is different. Like they aren't dumbed down, you know? They use like a lot of big words and vocabulary, and just the way the sentence structure is and everything. I think it's just a really interesting contrast, because like you said, the plots are so much more involved, but the language is so much simpler. And so it's just interesting to think about maybe why that is.
Right. Well, and I think it's amazing to think about the fact that you're living it. You're living in the middle of this golden age, and you're being able to partake of this huge boom around you, you know, and being able to take all of that in, which I think is pretty exciting thing. But you also get to discern. You also get to say, well, this is, you know, like Harry Potter is amazing and wonderful and is worthwhile. And you might, you know, pick up another book and say, well, why did this get published? You know, it's not everything that gets attention is going to be worth it, you know?
Exactly. And I also really appreciate, so I think I saw it either yesterday or today on my Facebook memories. I had posted a list of like the 100 greatest American books, or American children's books or something. And my comment on it was that I was surprised at how many of the books I had read and that how many of them were published before 1966. So now I have to go back and find that link so I can share it with you.
Yeah.
In the group page. But yes, I appreciate very much that we still have access to those older books, because a lot of them are my very favorite books.
Yes. And I think, I don't want it to sound like when I say like an earlier book or whatever was simpler or dealing with less complex problems, that it was not, you know, that's a bad thing.
Straightforward. They're straightforward.
There you go. There you go. And there's some lessons that are just classic lessons. There's some things that are just good to come to terms with, no matter when you live or how old you are. And I think there's value in just being able to, like, I just love children's literature. I think there's value in just being able to take in some of these stories and the lessons that go with them, you know.
Exactly. And this is why I love reading, and I love talking about reading.
Absolutely.
So we should probably wrap it up. I hope everybody enjoyed watching. Please vote on the poll. There should be a poll that you can see at some point in this video. So please vote on it, because we are opening up next month's pick to everybody. So vote for what you would like to read. We'll be taking votes probably through Saturday night. Is that what we decided? Okay, so Sunday we will announce what next month's read will be. And we're working on some fun ideas for future episodes, possibly involving guest hosts and special episodes and all kinds of fun stuff. So thanks for joining us.
All right, have a good night.